Welcome to Feminine Roadmap Podcast. I'm your host, Gina-R-Farrar. Each week, I bring you an inspiring conversation to help you navigate the challenges and changes of midlife so that you can not only survive, but thrive in your second half. Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. It is Gina here. And today we are going to be talking about the sandwich generation. And we're going to talk about the transformative effect of caregiving. Many of us are caregivers at this season of our life, and we're all muddling along in this stage of growth, and we're learning to grow and practice self-compassion. It's such a different season of life. And to have this conversation today, I have Sarahbeth Persiani. She is a caregiving consultant and educator. She's the author of Run, Walk, Crawl, a caregiver caught between generations. Sarahbeth, thank you so much for being on my show today.
You're very welcome. I'm so glad to be here.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what it is, Sarahbeth, that brought you to this mission and message? What is your story?
Oh, boy. Well, thank you. Like I said, it's a pleasure to be here. I wrote a book after my dad passed back in 2012. So he passed in 2012, and I wrote the book soon after. And I put it in the proverbial drawer for many years until just this year when I decided to publish it. So the gist, Gina, is that for about 5 years, I was caregiving. Unbeknownst to me, the term sandwich generation, I didn't even learn until well after the fact, because as a caregiver, you're really just a good daughter. You're just coming and going. I have my own family, an only child that I'm raising with my husband, and a full-time job that was very fulfilling, but also very high pressure, very high visibility. And then a dad who had congestive heart failure and dementia. And at the time, that wasn't even necessarily diagnosed. It was just, dad's getting older and a little more forgetful. It's not quite himself. So it wasn't until after I went through the experience of caregiving and kind of sat in my house quiet, did I reflect on what I had gone through. So as the title of the book suggests, Run, Walk, Crawl, I started in good stead. I got this at a good clip. I was in the race. And then over time, I kind of fell, they talk about leaning in. I kind of fell face flat trying to be off myself.
I have to tell you that I'm in the season where I'm an only child, and my mom's been single for most of my life. And so I do everything for her in terms of, we get the shopping, I take her to her doctor's appointments, all that sort of thing. And I make the appointments because my schedule, I do all the driving. But I do the same thing for my mother-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
So,
a lot.
What's interesting about it, Sarahbeth, is it's not just things that are on your calendar. There's so many layers to it underneath all of it. Like you're doing it, like you said, to be a good daughter, and you don't resent it per se, but it ends up feeling like so much because you're on, I don't know about you, but were you on constant call? So much time.
And that's it exactly where it is. Yep, it's the to-do list, like you said. So on the surface, I've got errands to run, I've got things to do. But there's an emotional and almost a psychological level where it's never really out of your mind. So even if I had, for a little while, we had home health aides coming in and checking on my dad, and that's a help. But always it was the roster of who's coming next and whose shift is it. And you always have a distraction. And what's different about the book that I wrote is I tried to address it from a workplace perspective. So it is by no means a book of self-help or how-to. It's really a straight telling of here's what happened with me just trying to maintain my former professional lifestyle. And one of the things that I learned from, and I didn't wrong, was I maintained myself as the stoic professional. I really compartmentalized when I went into work and tried to just be the former buttoned up Sarahbeth that I was, rather than sharing, here's what my home life looks like. And so, yes, I don't think people in the workplace realize that even though you're there, that there's an added level of responsibility that you're actually dealing with, that psychological pull that's wearing on you. And that's what I tried to share in the book, to show, yes, we all have this competition of who's busier than who. Personally, I do think caregivers are the busiest because of that added layer of pressure.
Pressure? The psychological pull. Yeah, that resonates. That's a really good way of expressing what my hand was trying to say.
Yeah.
That extra layer of what is it? It's psychological pull. And I don't know about you, Sarahbeth, but I don't know that I was aware of the psychological pull right away. And I think that is the part that makes you go from run to walk to crawl. It's like burden may be too strong of a word, but there is a weight always in the back of your mind. And you can live and plan your life, but it will always get disrupted by something connected to the person you're caregiving for. Let's talk a little bit about the other side of it, meaning there's a person on the other side. You probably had the same idea that I did, like, this is my parent or my mother-in-law, and they're a person and they have needs, right? They want to get their hair cut. They want to have another flat of eggs or whatever. So there is still that psychological pull of honoring them as a person. Like, it's not just about us.
Exactly.
Did you find that dance became difficult?
Yes. And another thing that I learned about after the fact, and it kind of touches upon it too, is so I got an appreciation for all of those kinds of things that my dad wanted to do and still be. And we were able to maintain him in his house for a good long time. Ultimately, at some point, we had to transition him. But yes, it's those kinds of things, like the haircuts and the errands, and let's go pick up your check, and let's go for a ride. But the real struggle for me is, and I've never been a medical person. I'm the baby in the family of five siblings. And I have some sisters who are kind of more attuned to the medical side of things. They worked in hospital labs and stuff. So it was a little ironic that I was the person in the healthcare proxy role. So I was kind of the primary caregiver. The real challenge for me, though, wasn't those day-to-day things, helping with, the haircuts and the appointments. It was seeing my father's health really start to fail, and not having a predisposition to understanding medical jargon, medical language, feeling comfortable in that setting. To me, it was almost like learning a foreign language. I could understand sometimes when I was hearing it, but I had a hard time explaining it back to siblings, or this is what it meant. But I learned also after the fact about something called compassion fatigue. And so it's synonymous with sympathetic trauma. STS is the acronym. People confuse it with burnout. And I certainly burned out at work and trying to do so many things, but they say burnout is more of a function of, if you remove yourself from it and you give yourself time, you can recoup. Whereas with compassion fatigue, you're affected by what you're witnessing in somebody else. And right now it's kind of prevalent with COVID and what everyone and these poor healthcare workers are experiencing. Even though they're themselves are not sick, they're seeing the effects of it. And so seeing the effects of my father's failing health was devastating to me, because I knew him as that independent, hero of a dad. And there's nothing you can do when you see someone gasping for breath and, having those dementia symptoms. And it really affected me so much so that I almost feel like I had a little PTSD after the fact, and that was what helped me write this book. I would just sit and replay woulda, shoulda, coulda moments. I wish I had known more. I didn't know enough about the disease progression of what he was going through. I was just witnessing the horrors of it. Writing for me was cathartic. It helped me to heal a lot of what I had gone through after the fact. Which is why now in my professional capacity, I'm trying to be more of an educator to people and help them understand there's phases of caregiving, there's things you can anticipate. But boy, I was ill-equipped in the moment. Maybe that was a blessing and a curse, but it was really hard.
Yeah, it is. I remember when my grandfather, the first time that I really witnessed age in him, if that makes any sense. It showed up in a situation where he wasn't strong enough to do something he'd always been able to do. And there is a real grieving process to losing the person you've always known, isn't there?
Yes. Yes. And that is so spot on, because you can grieve somebody right while they're standing right there in front of you. It doesn't necessarily mean that they've passed. And that was what I was taking into work every day, a grieving spirit, and trying to function with a lump in my throat as if everything was fine. So you just hit the nail on the head. It's a lot about kind of a perpetual loss that you witness over time. They call it the long goodbye.
The long goodbye.
Yeah.
One of the things that we aren't dealing with dementia that I know of, but when it comes to caregiving, I don't really want that title because it feels like I'm the parent or I'm the authority, or, I'm trying to maintain that sense of their independence, even though technically they're dependent, because I think, how would I want it to go? Right? Like, did you have that emotional journey too?
Yes. And for me, I had so much respect for my dad, that I never wanted it to feel like, oh, I'm in charge now and I'm the parent and you must kind of do what we say. But I do know that does happen in some cases where someone is, feels like they need that control. And, sometimes in caregiving, that's what it comes down to, is there's so much that you can't control.
So when I'm trying to keep the independence for my mom and my mother-in-law, I find that I struggle to pull back and not do too much, not be too much. But at the same time, they're relying on me to do all the driving, right? All the scheduling, all the things. And I find I'm trying not to be controlling, but I'm trying to manage. Maybe that's the word I try to focus on, is manage over control. But
Yes.
What have you learned about that through your journey?
Okay, sure. Yeah, and that's really common too, because, as I've said before, a lot of caregiving is learning to deal with things we can't control and we can't manage. It's so much is out of our reach, out of our control, whether it's the disease progression, medical appointments, things that just happen, right? You always expect a crisis or something out of the plan to happen when you're in that caregiver's role. So the more you can expect that, even though you don't know what it's going to be or when, the better off you are. That said, we all like to have feelings that we have some control over our life. It's what makes us feel like we're in the driver's seat. And lowers your stress level when you can. So some of the advice I try to give when I'm in workshops and talking to my care support groups is, what are the things that you can still manage? Whether it's physical health, what you eat, how much you exercise, your sleep schedule, all those kind of good best practices around self-care. I know that's such a buzz right now, but I think it's also really relevant. And there's so much goodness. I mean, I hate to sound Pollyanna about the COVID-19 crisis, because it's a horrible thing what we're all going through. But there's some silver lining, because it's allowing us to all slow down and just be in our situations, no matter what they are, and, learn some of these things that we need to do for self-care so that we can just get through it.
Yeah. For me, this break that COVID brought was much appreciated.
Good.
Because it was nice to get off that train of two people's needs outside of my own family's as well.
Yes.
I was kind of glad to have things slow down a little bit and to be able to get back to, quote, a normal, because my girls are home. And so we're able to be together, have dinner together. They weren't working. They're just now going back to work. So there's kind of this sense of life as it was just for a moment, which was a bit like an emotional vacation, because I keep going back to that psychological pull. And you talked about there's so much we can't control, and that's learning to deal with that as a caregiver. That is the psychological pull, because it seems like just when you get a rhythm, they'll need something, or something will go wrong, or all of a sudden there's an infection you have to deal with, or whatever. And let's talk about the emotional pull of the roles not being what they quote should be. In our mind is the child, right? This is the parent, you're the child, and now there's this weird shift. How was that for you, and how do you help people really navigate the emotional side of it? It's a conundrum, sort of,
Yes, it certainly is, and you're absolutely right. For me, the more difficult aspect of that emotional pull wasn't so much with the relationship I had with my dad as much as it was with my siblings.
Oh.
And that's always, even when in the work that I do, when I talk to people, that's the trigger. There's so many families where caregiving, unfortunately, can tear them apart because people are coming at it with different perspectives and opinions and levels of control, and it resurfaces some of your earliest childhood labels. And so for me, the emotional kind of tear down happened because who am I, the youngest of the five, trying to call the shots? So we had some real power struggles and some issues that I think there's still some scars there to this day. I like to think we did a nice job and we came through it okay. But it's really tough for people to know how to manage in the sibling front.
It's interesting that you talk about that because, of course, I'm an only child. That's like a foreign language, I'm like, okay. So, but my husband has two brothers. And from an outsider's perspective, not having siblings, I mean, I have children who have each other, and my mom comes from a family. But when you yourself don't have that experience, it's easy to have strong opinions.
Sure.
I got nothing to compare it to, right? I think, and I want your input on this because I'm sure there's only children out there as well. But if somebody's in that situation where they have siblings, I have noticed that it tends to fall to someone in every family. There's like the one person that somehow it falls to that person, and everyone's totally fine with you taking care of it. And then they're just like, oh, cool, it's taken care of. And they move on with their life and allow that, for lack of a better way of putting it, disruption, because they don't want to deal with it. That's what we're experiencing. We've just gotten them involved in like at least helping with the shopping, rotating through. But the thing is, it's falling on me because when I left my job to come home and build this thing that I'm building, I'm not working.
Exactly. Yeah, technically, right? But not at all correct. Yes.
So people are like, oh, she's got the time. And they're not saying it out loud, but all of their behaviors are like, it's taken care of. And what's funny is I'm an only child, so I'm obviously the firstborn, clearly. And my husband's the firstborn. So we have that whole like, oh, you take care of it. And my husband feels, you have that sense of duty and honor, right? And the thing I'm getting to, which is taking me forever, I don't know why, is why doesn't everybody, in my mind, this is my personality, why doesn't everybody have that sense of duty? And they don't. And I think that causes stress in the sibling realm because some people are fine to have nothing to do with it. Some people want to have an opinion, but not have anything to do with it. And then you have the people who want to drop in and feel like they're doing something and then pop back out and really have only just stirred the pot and not really helped move things forward. Am I right? This is what I'm picturing in other people's situations. And how do you navigate that? Because like you said, if you're the youngest, that's a different role than if you're the oldest. Yeah. If you're the oldest, you kind of don't have a problem usually stepping it up.
Yeah. No, you definitely have a good handle on it because there's all of that. There's so many different dynamics and different families that come at it from different perspectives and angles and approaches. I don't think there's any right or wrong. If I could go back, what I would have liked, what we should have done different was to maybe have like a little family discussion up front to say, let's get clear on our roles and how we can each help and have it be a little more formalized. Instead, it just happens so organically, which, normally maybe that's, a good thing in other parts of life, but it leaves a lot of expectations that weren't met and boundaries that were crossed. And, I don't want to paint a bad picture, though, and I was very careful in the book to not paint anybody the martyr or the villain, because we all did the best we could. And even though some, as we mentioned, some people look like they're just swooping in to help when they can and leave, they have their own situations. So it happened how it did. It wasn't perfect. Just to give a little bit more background and perspective. So I had an older sister, my sister Luann, who passed from pancreatic cancer. And another one of my sisters took care of her as the primary caregiver. And that was tough because my sister Luann lasted and lingered, the poor thing, much longer than they thought that she would. So she really, by the time she passed, she was probably 70 pounds, and she just really had a hard time. And so the sister who probably was the best medically wise to take care of my dad just couldn't. She had gone through such an emotional roller coaster herself with Luann that it wouldn't have been fair to expect for her to now, jump in and be there for my dad. So she wasn't the same person afterwards. Caregiving changes you. She helped in the way she could. She gave a lot of emotional support to my dad. So I don't point fingers at anyone, and I tried to be fair in the book to say, here's how we all helped in our imperfect ways. It just is what it is. But back to your point, if I could say it before it flies out of my head and I lose it. Again, in the work that I do when I talk to people, I find there's two camps of people. There's the very pragmatic caregivers, the siblings who come at it because it is duty bound. Like, I will do the right thing because I'm a responsible adult, and this is what I should do. And then there's other people who I think are more tied from the heart. Not to say the duty bound don't have feelings and a heart, but there's some people who really lose themselves in it. They get, it's that compassion fatigue angle that I talked about. And unfortunately, that's the camp I fell into, where I started getting emotionally attached to what my father was experiencing and couldn't change it. And it's just a difference. It's a different approach. You can hear in the way they talk about it, and the excitement of, I'm going to take Mom for her hair to be done. And it's almost as if they're going and they're on an outing versus, we got to get this done. Sometimes I felt a little angry at different emotions that I was feeling as things started to unravel.
I'm processing what you're saying because I'm more of a pragmatic caregiver, I think. I definitely come at it because it's the right thing to do.
And that's okay. That is fine. There's absolutely no right or wrong. I use that example because it's more of a lens for me to be able to tell maybe the state of caregiving that the person is in. I find that the more pragmatic caregivers are a little bit healthier and don't lose themselves in it. So it's not as much of a red flag for me. And, and honestly, there's nothing clinical or technical about this. It's just the lens that I've learned to use over time.
It's interesting because my personality, the way I'm bent, I don't understand how people can be like, that's cool, you take care of it, and I'm just going to live my life and do what I want. Here I am doing the Monday through Friday and all of this. And it's interesting to me that some people can be so disconnected. And I wonder, if I get out of my judgy pants for a second, I wonder if for some people, if that's an emotional coping skill. Like it's not even just like, oh, I'm not going to help, but like literally being emotionally ill-equipped somehow. Not that it's an excuse, but trying to figure out, maybe do some people disconnect?
Yep, I think you're spot on again. Yes, that's probably their best way of coping with it, is to just, unfortunately remove themselves from it. Even though that might not seem like it's the best course of action, but you're right. It is a way that they're coping. Another thing, just to bring it back to the workplace, because what I really was dealing with all along was also the perspective of being one of the only people in my age group. So I had a lot of millennial colleagues and I had a lot of baby boomer colleagues. So the messages, and I didn't share a lot. To be honest, I was my stoic self coming in, compartmentalizing, getting the job done. And the message that I kind of gotten unspoken, boom or do. We've all raised families and had to be in that situation, so it's hard and you'll get through it. Whereas the millennial, and I hate to sound so, talk about judgy and categorizing people, but when I was in my 20s, I would have never had any perspective of any of this anyway, right?
Right.
So I'm not trying to point fingers and be too judgy and too, it's easy for us to categorize, those darn millennials. And, I know that's how this sounds, but I'm trying to say it with the caveat that I had, about as much depth in my 20s as, a Dixie cup. So I don't mean to do that, but it affected me in the workplace because I was working with a younger set of people who didn't necessarily get, that when I came in looking like that frazzled, frizzy-haired, frumpy train wreck that, I didn't mean to. I just had a lot going on.
That's an interesting aspect too, Sarahbeth, to think about is, as much as we try to compartmentalize, it's impossible to completely separate ourselves out like that. It's completely impossible to turn off the concern or turn off the to-do list. You had that added dementia, which is another level. And let's talk about, so you've got this professional life and you can accomplish things, right? You've got your things you need to do, your projects, and you're moving forward. But then you have this thing that's malleable and uncontrollable, which is watching the decline of someone's health and how you navigate that, because it is hard to know when to pull the trigger on certain decisions, I think. Like when is it time to say, okay, living alone now isn't okay anymore, right?
Right.
When do you decide, okay, now you need to go live in a home or whatever? Like, I think that's the hardest decision because I don't want to make that decision for someone else.
So right. That's exactly it. And for us, it was the really very typical fall. The thing you wear that wristband, the fall monitor, and it was the old, please practice this and tell us if you fall. And it was the fall that ultimately was the straw that landed my dad in the facility. And, in some ways that was a good thing because I was running myself ragged to try to keep him in his home to the point where we had a bed, a little recliner that would go full out flat so that one of us could stay overnight and be there. The heart medication he was on caused him to get up. So someone would have to be there to help him because his balance was off. And I even make a little joke in my book that I'd hear my millennial colleagues saying, who's going spinning after work? And that was their extra time. And I would laugh kind of, sarcastically in my head thinking, oh yeah, I'm spinning every night, and I wake up dizzy. And I was helping my dad to the bathroom at 2:00, 4:00, rushing home to get my daughter ready for school and put her on the bus. So I had these late nights where I was not well rested, where I was kind of the hamster on the wheel, running to get her on the bus, her looking cute and ready for school and off to school, and then myself somewhat presentable, even though that was to be debated. I was dressing definitely more for comfort than for fashion, and then just getting myself to work, always with this constant exhaustion factor. And you really be run down to the point where you don't even realize that you're that unhealthy. You just get used to using caffeine as a crutch and not feeling well rested. It's almost like there's some analogy I heard, and I'm not good repeating it, but like the lack of sleep, you're almost drunk in a state of not being in like a good clear mind because you're just moving in that way. So yeah, that was the incident that helped make the transition to him into the nursing home. And what I found then very interesting is a lot of people thought, well, now it's easy. What do you have to worry about now? Not realizing, and back to our keyword there, the psychological pull. Just because he's in a different place doesn't mean that I can now switch it off. It's just I have a different set of now concerns. Are they taking good care of him? If what I see when I'm there is just for my benefit. is he getting the right level of care?
That communication piece too. My mother-in-law has been in the hospital a couple of times with UTIs. Like they get to the point where she's had 4 rounds of antibiotics, and
Oh
they want
boy.
to send her home. And I was like, no, we are not sending her home. She has insurance. She needs to go to a rehab until she's strong enough. And they were like kind of fighting me. I'm like, look, you're not sending her home. It's like as soon as they meet some random criteria, and I think as a caregiver, you have to have a good set of huevos. You have to be able to stand your ground and be like, no, I have steel balls over here and you're not going to win this battle. Pardon my description, but that's what I was saying to my husband, no, these people aren't going to push me to put my mother-in-law in a situation that I feel isn't safe for her. So then they go to this 2-week facility, and then you realize that, gee, you never talked to a doctor. Gee, there's these things that fall through the crack, because one thing is taken care of and they're getting their medication. She's getting stronger. They're doing physical therapy. And then you have the whole battle of getting the support in the home and getting those people to show up. So I feel like this conversation of caregiving, we can go to work and be this one person, right? You're running that project or you're handling that thing. And it's like you're kind of polished and pulled together. And then in this other area, it's like whack-a-mole. It's one giant game of whack-a-mole. Where is the next mole going to pop up? And am I even going to get close to knocking it down before the next one pops up?
You're right. And you're to advocate for her, because that's exactly it. It's staying on top of now this whole new set of healthcare discussions and nuances that you also have to get used to. And the who's who, the rotation of who are the people taking care of her there. It is whack-a-mole on steroids, because you've got a lot of moving parts. And one thing that started happening for me, because I would want to spend the time with my father. So the one thing that my father started to do was to get a little quieter. And I think it was a combination of both the disease progression and where he was with dementia, where he didn't maybe want to talk as much. So, I don't know if you're familiar with the nursing home. I call it the nursing home lineup. The chairs, the wheelchairs of patients that are just lined up in the hallway.
I hate that.
And, the first time I ever saw that, me too. It stopped me dead in my tracks. I just was horrified to see it, let alone one day and see my dad in the mix, right? So that's about the worst feeling you can ever experience. But what I started to do, we would go and visit outside in the patios and in the visiting rooms. But I started to just say, okay, well, I'm going to be in this and sit there with him, sit in the lineup. I started calling it kind of old-fashioned reality TV, right? Because you're there watching the buzz of professionals do their job. And it changed me, because there's a lot that you can see when you're just quiet and you take it in. And it changed me how I went back into the workplace, too. I wasn't the kind of boisterous, here's my opinion out in front, Sarahbeth, that I had been in previous years. I was okay to sit on the sidelines and to listen and see the different personalities at play. I think that was a real turning point for me, in knowing what I wanted to do next and making the transition from that workplace.
That's interesting. So what I hear you saying is it gave you a new appreciation for work dynamics with people and personalities just in sitting in that space in this situation that was so uncomfortable. Because I know it's uncomfortable. The 2 weeks my mother-in-law was in that place, I still had to, they weren't taking care of the laundry. So I'd need to go take her laundry to her house because she's wearing other people's clothes. And there's a dignity question. There's this dignity that I wanted to maintain. And I felt like that was something I did try to control. And I felt very defensive when I saw a lack of care for dignity. Did you experience that?
Yes, I did. And I did that exact same thing with the laundry. I said, nope, there's no way that I'm going to not do this. I was being a good daughter. I'm going to take this laundry home. And it does get to be a real challenge, at least it was for me. And in time, I ended up letting that one thing go. But you're right. There's a lot of little things like that. I try to always just remember the things that my father enjoyed, the Coney Island hot dogs that we have. I bring treats like that for him and his hallway friends. And, maintaining the dignity that, yes, you're here, but we still know who you are. And we still want to bring you the things that you like. He in the end got so very sick that, it was good to have the medical professionals and the help there. But you're so spot on, Gina, with just noticing that it's everything from laundry to the emotional shock of seeing the hallway lineup, personas. There's so much that goes into it. It's very difficult, but I don't want to leave it that it's just such drudgery. The rewards, I think, get shortchanged, the rewards of caregiving, because ultimately it's a transition where you feel so much more fulfilled in your life when you're knowing you're making a difference in someone else's life. I think it improves relationships, it deepens relationships, it gives perspective, it gives just a sense of humility, that sense that we're not in control. That's okay. We can't be in control and we shouldn't be. So yeah, this has been a good conversation for me, because every time I really get into it, you start to see that we're all together in it. You have some commonalities and had some experience that I can totally relate to. And I think, like I said, your family is lucky to have you because you're advocating in a very strong way.
What is, in your perspective, the power of community? Because that's what I'm hearing you say. When we know that someone else is going through something that we are, there's a bit of comfort and encouragement in knowing we're not alone, right?
Yeah, and that seems to be one of the cliches that's coming out of this whole COVID-19 crisis, but it's true. I love the transparency that it's bringing to light with the fact that we're all working from home now, and these Zoom calls, you can't hide it, baby. Those families are there in the background for all to see. And thank goodness for that, because, now you can't be that buttoned up, person, like it or not. It's level setting that we are all in it together, that this is it. This is who we are.
Is there, in your workshops, do you find that the element of guilt and shame comes up a lot for the caregivers?
Yep. Yes. It's I call them the I'm sorries. And in fact, I've written some blogs on it and some articles on, when you're talking to people, and I used to do it myself. Sorry, I can't go for drinks after work. I mean, granted, right now it's different because we're all in quarantine, but in the traditional workday, you can't be that person who is able to go and do a lot of with your colleagues or your friends because you're highly scheduled. You have to be there making dinner or, going to that doctor's appointment or whatever it may be. So I call them I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I can't take that business trip because I can't afford to be away that long. And you're guilty because you feel as if you're letting other people down that aren't in your immediate circle. And that unfortunately is a part of it. I try to tell people, hopefully your friends and your colleagues will understand. There's a whole workplace discussion that has to happen around that. I don't think we're quite there yet, but that's a lot of work to be done on educating colleagues and managers and the workforce on what this toll that it takes. But you're right, the guilt factor plays a big part of it.
It's back to that psychological and emotional pull. There's this dual life that we're living, right? We're trying to live our life as we hoped it would look and be. And then you've got this other human being that you care about and you want them to have a quality of life. But for me, it's easy to feel resentment because it's almost like I'm at this prime point in my life, but I'm having to put off my life. So like when you're a young woman and you get married and you have children, we put our children first, right? And we go through that whole journey. We're caregiving for them. It's a different kind of caregiving journey, but that's what it is, right? And then they kind of get to this place where you feel like, okay, I think I think this is set. So now I'm going to go do this thing for myself. And then your parents decline. And it's like, holy cow. I thought that I'd have more time between the two seasons. And they really didn't. There really wasn't much of a gap.
Right. Yeah. And there's some people who get very resentful of that because you do feel that your life is, it is, it would be very not true, very insincere of me to say, oh, that's okay. There's too much goodness that comes from it. And that's unfortunately the reality is that it does put your life on hold. It does. You try to say there's some ways that you can still retain the things that you love to do. For me, I used to love to go on trail walks for a long time before we had children. We had our fur babies. Our dogs were our children. So we had years and years of going for trail walks. And I used to look back at that time with such, oh my goodness, that's who I want to be. Why can't I have time to go trail walk? And I learned to make time for that. Just on Mother's Day a couple of days ago, that's what we all went and did. So it's trying to squeeze in what's going to still make you happy anyway, and finding maybe more intentional, mindful moments in the time that you do have. Yes, it might not be that time to yourself that you really want and need, but it can make space to do something else. There's a blog that I wrote a couple of years ago, Superwoman in Dishwashing Gloves, because I got to the point where I would even use the time washing dishes as time for me. And my daughter learned that when those dishwashing gloves are on, I'm off limits. And to enjoy, this is the instant gratification of cleaning up after dinner and the warm soapy water. And it got to be almost like a Zen-like moment where if this is as sad as my life is, that washing dishes is now my happy place, then I'm really going to enjoy washing these dishes. So, I mean, I guess that's, something to be said for mindfulness. Not so eloquently, but I hope you know what I mean.
No, but it's such a practical and honest look at normalcy, like trying to find that sense of normalcy in my life. It sounds selfish, but my life, mine apart
right.
from this person's needs and that person's needs. And, why are you out of that medication? Like, how did that happen? Did you not have extra? And, I can't figure out the TV and just all the things. And I get it, man. It's like, I'm doing dishes. Don't interrupt me.
That's exactly it.
It's such a journey.
Oh, sad but true.
Oh, the other side of it for me, Sarahbeth, is I'm always, and I don't know if you did this and if anybody listening can resonate with this, but it's like I try to put myself in that situation and think, how would I want my children to feel? How would I, in a perfect world, want this to go down? And I wouldn't want to feel like a burden. I would want my children to have a certain level of joy in seeing me still. And I think that is the challenge, is sometimes the responsibility gets so great that the relationship suffers in our own emotional journey. Do you understand what I'm trying to express?
Yeah, I do. And maybe is it touching a little bit upon how are we planning ourselves for our golden years, I suppose. It's you give so much to your family, and you feel selfish when you want that time to yourself, but there's I guess I don't have an answer for it. I do give thought to how it should be, and my way of trying to plan is to try to keep down the clutter factor. I think, I won't leave this big mess of a house to my daughter that I had to deal with, because there's that factor as well, having to clear out somebody's lifetime of belongings and possessions. My dad was a hoarder, and that's a little bit of the story too. I had a childhood shame of not to school because he so much. We all learned to live with it. It was a big clean out. So when I think of planning ahead and what I'll leave behind for my daughter, it will be a little bit more organized, to say the least.
Yeah, it's just that, we have these relationships with the people that we're caregiving for, but when you get into a caregiver role, it shifts the relationship. And so I think there's a grieving of the loss of what was.
Yeah,
We're
for
giving
sure.
up things on a lot of levels, aren't we?
Yes, you're right.
And that, I think that caregiving conversation needs to honestly be had, that, you know what? We are going to grieve. Like we said early on in the conversation, the person's in front of you and you're grieving. It's like, how do you enjoy their company when there's so much responsibility? That's hard
Right.
sometimes because they become a task on the list. Did you find that to be
And I
true?
probably did. I did. And yeah, that touches upon probably one of my woulda, shoulda, couldas, where I definitely was more in the task of, making sure all of the to-dos were organized. And in a good sense, that's where my sisters and my brother helped to fill in. I think they were there in a more of a relationship, emotional support way. I did get there, in some ways where I said I would just sit with him in the hallway lineup. There were days where it was just about being there. But, when I look back on it, it was a lot of we've got to clean up the house. We've got to, especially when you're living at home, it was a lot of the tasks and the to-dos and the appointments, the dentures, the eyeglasses, the hearing, my own daughter, being very regimented. Now, having gone through it, I think I have the luxury to be a little bit more mindful, have the time and the experiences that we would all want with my family now.
I think what I'm hearing you say is, for whatever the journey is for you right now, try to anchor in on those moments and also push it forward to, how would I like my children's experience to be? Maybe better or
Yes.
different. You're like
Right.
living in two time zones.
You're right. You're right. No one wants to be a burden, but you don't really know what's going to happen in life. You just don't. We all have our best laid plans, but it's going to shake out how it shakes out.
And I think that leaning into that is helpful. I think if we fight too hard for it to look a certain way, that is an emotional burden in and of itself. The expectations.
Right.
Yeah. So
I agree.
if someone was sitting in front of you and they were walking this journey, what 3 things would you really want them to anchor in on to help them navigate the caregiving journey in a way that's hopefully more healthy, more whole, and to minimize the collateral damage? Because I feel like there's always some collateral damage to this journey. But what 3 things are really important to you for people to hear who are going through this balancing work, balancing caregiving, maybe still kids at home, like, all the things? What would you say?
Yeah, that's great. I would when we touched upon this a little bit, but it's about identifying the things that help you to still feel like you're yourself. Because as we mentioned, caregiving can really interrupt, your life plan, and it certainly does postpone things, but it doesn't have to stop it completely. So strive to do the things that make you happy. And, like I said, for me, it was trail walks and, finding mindful moments in dishes or whatever, meditative moments I could. My faith and my spirituality really helped to get me through as well. So I would say certainly feel fulfilled. So that's the first thing. And those are those self-care buzzwords too. I know we hear a lot about self-care nowadays, but it really is true, whether it's, something physical like taking a walk or the healthy foods you eat or sleep, whether it's emotional, the time talking with friends and connecting with the people you love, or spiritual, yoga or meditation. I love to read the Bible and listen to sisters that really grounded me. So it's what are those things that are going to make you feel good? And the second thing is, I think maybe to slow down. And again, COVID-19 is helping us all to do this. Like it or not, we are all forced to be a little bit more in our own space. But normally I would say remember there is time, get off social media if it's not really helping you to feel like your day is well spent. Slow down. And the third thing is, I would say it's never too late to take the time to heal the hurts. Whatever those relationships are that maybe are broken, to give them some thought, because there's a lot of power in forgiveness, and relationships matter. So looking at whatever might have happened in the past that you want to heal it's just healthy.
That's an interesting point. I think for some people, as we wrap it up, caregiving touches on triggers and wounds, doesn't it?
It does. It sure does.
And
sometimes we think, oh, well, it's better left in the past. There's nothing I can do now. Well, there really is always something you can do. Even if somebody has passed, you say, well, I can't because he or she died. But you can. You can either, you can pray on it. You can ask forgiveness to the people who are still around, or just talk to them about what happened. Whatever it might be to make you feel like you've got some closure. It's important.
It's nice to get the closure before they pass too, isn't it? Because then you have those moments of more peace with them present.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. Yep. Unfortunately, we all have those regrets. You can be a little bit mindful of what they might be and try to do it before you have the regret, then that's always good.
Yes, I agree. Well, Sarahbeth, I want to thank you so much for sharing your journey. We've had an interesting technological glitchy conversation, but I always feel like I have this philosophy that when there's a lot of resistance, it's the greater the message. Right.
Yeah.
And so we have found a way to get this message out, because it is really impacting our generation so profoundly.
Sure.
They say that we are the most impacted generation, the sandwich generation of any generation stuck between. We're called sandwich because we are caught between our children and our parents, and being responsible on both ends.
Right.
And it's a lot.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And thank you for just helping me to talk about it, because there's so much involved here that hopefully I've made some sense. So thank you.
You absolutely have made some sense. And I feel like this is one of those navigation conversations that needs to continue. And so
yeah, I agree.
Thank you for bringing that gentle and mindful perspective, because it can be such a task we can forget, right? We can forget the human, emotional, psychological side. So thank you so much for shedding light on the things that will help us do things in a healthier, more holistic way.
Okay, with that. Thank you.
So today, friends, I've been speaking with Sarahbeth Persiani. She is the author of Run, Walk, Crawl, a caregiver caught between generations. She's a caregiving consultant and an educator. And if you would like to connect with her, get a copy of her book, if you will head over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 168. I will have hyperlinks to her and her book. And while you're there, please leave your name and email address and become a part of my tribe. I send out periodic emails to let you know what's going on. And friends, this is one of those things that most of us will have to navigate in this season of our lives. For some people, it comes a little later. For some people, it comes a little sooner. But you don't have to struggle through it alone, and you don't have to be buried under guilt and shame. Reach out to a community of people. Find those lines of boundary that feel healthy for you. Check out this resource of Run, Walk, Crawl. And be honest with yourself. Find a way to navigate this. Find the community that's going to give you the support that you need. Find the way to navigate your relationships with your family in the healthiest way you can. Together, we are better. We are stronger. We've learned what we can from COVID. We can always, when we know better, we do better, friends. Don't be discouraged. Link arms with others. Read this book. Maybe have a book club. Find a group of people and create the support that you need if you can't find it. So thank you so much for giving us a part of your time. We hope this has really blessed you and given you some resources and some tools to help you navigate this part of your journey. We thank you so much, and we look forward to sharing more valuable resources in the weeks to come. Thank you so much, my friends. Bye-bye.